2015, we continue with articulating the articulations. After novel articulations, now we have articulations of Italian diaspora with Matteo Pretelli and Matteo Brera. Professor Pretelli is from University of Naples, L'Orientale. The Italians in Sweetwater County, Wyoming, very cold. Please take your floor.
All right. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Beautiful. All right. My paper examines the experience of Italians who settled in Wyoming, the less populated state in the United States. Specifically, I want to focus on the case of Italians in the mining town of Rock Springs in Sweetwater County, where most immigrants came at the turn of the 20th century from present-day Trentino-Alto Adige region and a minority from Piedmont. So the first question is, why such a study? First, while there is an extensive literature on Italians living in cities along the northeastern coast, there are relatively few contributions about Italians in the American West, except for California. In 2022, Kenneth Scambray published a volume on Italians in various states of the American West. So my paper aims to further explore this historiographical field and trend. So what about Rock Springs in Wyoming? Rock Springs was established in the 19th century for coal production for the Union Pacific Railroad Company, which controlled the local mines. These mines employed a growing number of European and Chinese immigrants. The latter became victims of a massacre in Rock Springs in 1885, which gained national attention. A massacre due to the anti-Asian sentiment among European workers who feared a threat to white settlement. In the 1870s, Trentino immigrants began arriving in Wyoming from an area that, until the end of World War I, was controlled by the Austrian-Hungarian Empire and was called Italian Tyrol. So Italian-speaking immigrants often identify themselves as Tyroleans, sometimes even as Austrians rather than Italians, a practice that often saved them from anti-Italian discrimination highly widespread in the country. Accustomed to hard work and harsh climates, they quickly adapted to the difficult conditions of mining work in Wyoming, developing a sense of sharing and tolerance with other ethnic groups. Their Americanization was rapid, facilitated by the Union Pacific housing policies that avoided creating ethnic neighborhoods. So my paper, therefore, focuses on this multi-ethnic interaction and the evolution of ethnic identity among Trentini Americans in Rock Springs over time. It is estimated that between 1870 and 1914, about 64,000 Trentini, or Tyroleans if you prefer, migrated to the United States. It's not easy to determine exactly how many Italians lived in Wyoming, as they were sometimes recorded as Tyroleans and other times as Italians. However, roughly about 2,000 Italians resided there in the 1920s. In 1911, approximately 1,000 Italian Tyroleans, many from the Val di Non, were counted in Sweetwater County. They worked not only in mining, but also in industry and agriculture. They actively participated in unionism, and their high levels of education allowed some to enter banking, saloon and grocery management, and even politics sometimes. In the 1920s, the 1920s were a decade of intense xenophobia in the United States, culminating, as we know, in the United States Congress passing the Quota Acts in 1921 and 1924, drastically limiting the entering of Southern and Eastern Europeans because they were perceived as undesirable. Against this national backdrop, Rock Springs stood out as a place of multi-ethnic tolerance, celebrated as the town of 52 nationalities coexisting each other peacefully. Shared hardship of climate and mining work contribute to the encounter, while many perceived ethnicities has something to value. One of the two local newspapers, the Rock Springs Miner, emphasized this aspect, presenting, for instance, the local Slavonic societies as a model for other ethnic groups, since they founded the Slovensky Dom, or Slovenian House, as an ethnic gathering place. The press also reported a calmer climate in the city after the 1885 incidents. Chinese workers employed for decades by the Union Pacific Coal Company were now honored when they choose to return to China to spend their retirement. Among them, for instance, Jim Lao Chi, who experienced the events of 1885 firsthand and later worked for the company for 40 years, was described as a likable, ingenious, courageous, and loyal person. He even acted as a special officer for the city of Rock Springs for 25 years and left the place with a letter or recommendation from the local mayor. The spirit of multi-ethnic tolerance was expressed in the late 1920s through the organization in Rock Springs of an international night to celebrate local diversities. Held annually for some years and later intermittently in the 1960s and the 1990s, International Night attracted thousands of participants who enjoyed performance by local ethnic groups dressed in national costumes, singing ethnic songs, and offering ethnic food. Speeches were delivered in both English and native languages. A moving ceremony featured representatives of various ethnic groups standing in a circle, each lighting the candle of the person next to them, as to celebrate toleration. Furthermore, despite anti-Asian sentiments scattered across the country, the spectacle included displays of Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese immigrant cultures, as well as the presence of representatives of African American and Native communities, and even people from the West Indies and Aboriginal Australians. In 1928, the Rock Springs Miner wrote, and I quote, "The humanity of all the world in miniature. The dress that is worn, the language spoken, the music, the dances, the art, the cultures of people from the great centers of population and from remote quarters of the world. A kaleidoscope of view of races, creeds, and nations of every continent gathering in mutual friendly accord. Such is the annual International Night, which was celebrated for the third time in the city," end of quote. In 1926, the event featured a speech by former Colorado Governor William Sweet, who emphasized the need to placing humanities above all nations and openly opposed the Quota Acts. In 1928, Dr. Henry Sazzallo, a former professor of philosophy and of education at Teachers College, Columbia University, and later a visiting professor in Europe for the Carnegie Foundation, gave another speech. Originally from Dubrovnik, Dalmatia, it was described by the press as a product of American opportunity, while, I quote, "his life and parentage constitute a personal bond between the people of Europe and the peoples of the United States," end of quote. The local Italians participated in this tolerant environment, thought they were not sometimes free from prejudice. For instance, in 1936, the statute of the Società di Fratellanza Operaia di Mutuo Soccorso in Superior, Wyoming, a town close to Rock Springs, stated that any honest man who spoke Italian could be a member of the association, except for Black and Chinese individuals. Transnational ties between Italy and the Trentino communities in the United States existed over time. For instance, in 1932, a monument was erected in Brera, Val di Non, dedicated to miners working in the United States, funded largely by immigrants overseas. Given the distance, maintaining contact from Wyoming to Italy was not easy, it was quite challenging. Nonetheless, Wyoming Italian residents sent aid to Sicilians and Calabrians heavily affected by the 1908 Messina disastrous earthquake. Some others, like Gus Bertolina, even traveled to fascist Italy in 1932, praising Mussolini as a sort of ethnic hero, as did many others Italian Americans in the United States. Bertolina, who had been away from Italy for 24 years, admired Mussolini's vigorous modernization of Italy, appreciating supposed urban improvements, excellent sanitary conditions, and an economic situation less burdensome than in the United States, where alcoholism rate seemed higher. His views were likely influenced by the New York's Progresso Italo-Americano, a pro-Mussolini newspaper circulating even in Wyoming. In 1937, the Italian Council in Denver celebrated the introduction of Columbus Day in Wyoming. As known, the sailor seen as the ultimate ethnic myth by Italian Americans, today pretty much contested. However, by the late 1930s, letters between Wyoming State Senator Rudolph Anselmi and ethnic leader Paul Milazzo, both of Italian ancestry, suggested a lack of true ethnic cohesion among Italians in Wyoming. After all, the fascist regime in the interwar period was not particularly interested in maintaining strong ideological ties with the immigrants in Wyoming. For example, King Victor Emmanuel III awarded the Crown of Italy to Mr. Facinelli for his efforts in helping Italians achieve naturalization and stability in Wyoming. Furthermore, by 1934, no cities in Wyoming offered Italian language courses for newest Italian generations educated in English in American schools. World War II profoundly impacted the lives of Rock Springs residents. For instance, Ellen Novotny, whose family was from present-day Slovenia, so not an Italian lady, recalled in her memories, and I quote, "World War II played an important role in my years at home and in early childhood at school. It was in the news, on the radio, on the newsreels before the movie's main feature, in talk downtown, in magazines, books, in the playground, during play with friends, and in what we ate, wore, and where we went," end of quote. The Union Pacific Employee magazine in Rock Springs dedicated a special section titled "Our Men in the Armed Forces," featuring employees serving in the military, in the US military in World War II, like Second Lieutenant Italian Dario Rizzi. Overall, World War II demonstrated the American patriotism of Rock Springs Italians. After Pearl Harbor and Mussolini's declaration of war to the United States, the local Società Italo-Americana pledged loyalty to the US. In July 1943, Mussolini's fall was also welcomed in Rock Springs. Mostly, many second-generation Italian Americans served in the US Armed Forces, including Silvio Pidri, whose story as prisoner of war in Europe is captured in the fabulous documentary that I will definitely suggest you, The Ursers, by his grandson Mark Pidri. Overall, Sweetwater County's World War II American veterans records show that mostly 7% had Italian-sounding last names. They could be even more, but more or less these are the numbers. In the post-World War II period, although Italians in Wyoming were fully identified as Americans, they continued to maintain some transnational ties with Italy. For instance, the monthly magazine Risveglio Trentino, the Trentino Awakening, dedicated to the interest of the Trentino natives in the United States, also reached Wyoming. In 1948, a group of Trentino Americans, including a resident of Rock Springs, sailed to Italy. Others, like World War II veteran Emilio Costantino, still from Rock Springs, still had relatives in Italy and visited them several times after World War II. Connections were also maintained through associations. Since 1957, the Associazione Trentini nel Mondo, the Association for Trentini in the World, has existed to aid emigrants. After the establishment of the Italian regional administration in the 1970s, the province of Trento, which has a special administrative autonomy, began sensing Trentini's club around the world, organizing emigration festivals in Italy and facilitating group visits by members of overseas clubs. Since the late 1990s, Trento has also funded trips to Italy for young Trentini living abroad to help them connect with their ancestral homeland, as well as sending local young people to explore ethnic communities abroad. In Wyoming, a Tyrolean Trentino-Wyoming group has existed since 1985, affiliated with the International Tyrolean Trentini Organization of North America, an umbrella organization in the United States dedicated to preserving regional culture. Despite challenges in engaging younger generation, the club has organized over time festivals of traditional food, facilitated the arrival of Italian students in Wyoming, and fostered dialogue among young Trentini Americans across the country. The club has also sent young people from Rock Springs to Trento and to Trentino Alto Adige in general. Among them is Caroline Smalstig, the current vice president of the club, who spent 3 weeks in Italy through an exchange program in 2017. Her account vividly recalled the beauty of the landscape, the charm of the Italian lifestyle, and the rediscovery of her ethnic roots during a visit to a church in Brera, a venue whose photograph once hung in her grandmother's home. It is the church where her ancestors were shipped before departing for the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now it's the turn of Matteo Brera. And do you use slides as well? Okay. White on paper. Thank you.
All right.
Excuse me for this back and forth, but I'm hearing is much better off the stage.
All right. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yeah? Good. Very well. Okay. Thank you to the organizers, the Comune di Genova, and all the Museo Galata, and all the other organizers for having me here. This is well, I'll probably have to go a braccio, as I often do, especially in this phase of this 3 years project, 3 years Marie Curie project that is developing between Seton Hall University and University of Padua, to illustrate where we are with the project, which is a project that aims to study the Italian American press published in Louisiana and in other southern states, which we found to have a very fertile, field, area of investigation as far as the presence of Italian newspapers or newspapers published in Italian language is concerned. And then I'll illustrate some of the preliminary, findings. The project is titled A Darker Shade of Whiteness, Proculatum. It was useful for finding the right acronym for the project, which sounded nice, the show. These are the 3 main aims of the project as far as we are. Studying the public discourse as it emerges from rare and understudied sources, periodicals, ethnocultural periodicals published in Louisiana. That was the main focus of the project. We now moved outside of the borders of the state up to Alabama and also Tennessee. In particular, as far as Alabama is concerned, the Birmingham area, and in Tennessee, in Memphis, so the delta of Mississippi. The second and main point of the project is about the is about observing how the racialization of Southern Italians, mostly in the US South, was the result of the appropriation of stereotypes rooted in post-Risorgimento divide transposed from Italy. So there was a transnational movement of ideas and cultural biases, mostly ascribable to the Italian school of criminology. In the end, the aim of the project is to study how and to what extent practical and rhetorical strategies were enacted by the Italian communities through the migrant press in order to negotiate the racial standing between 1877, so the Reconstruction, the end of Reconstruction that paved the way for the privilege of African Americans' voting rights, and the formation of an early Southern civil movement in 1945. What South I've already discussed. This is one of the newspapers, Il Gladiatore, published in Birmingham, Alabama. So the area at the beginning was, the area of investigation was the Gulf area and the Southeast. We moved out of those borders, as I said, Paradise Ridge, Nashville, Tennessee, Memphis. And the rationale for this movement, this overflowing outside of the envisioned borders of the project, is the fact that observing and studying these newspapers, it is quite evident that there is a web of connections between these communities that were not isolated. So these newspapers actually physically exemplify what an early kind of social media diffusion through these connections, these areas, was actually present, and brings to us the image and the physical representation of communities that were actually tied together through these early social media that are the newspapers. Now, this is the website of the project. It's already there. That's the address. I couldn't really show more than this because I didn't want to clog up the system in terms of the streaming and the PowerPoint presentation, but the website is live. And the website has its role in one of the main, in the key areas for the project, that is the preservation of these newspapers. Now, this is one of the fragments of L'Italo Americano, published in New Orleans between 1894 to 1950. It was followed in its experience by the Voce Coloniale, published always in New Orleans between 1950 and 1955. Other newspapers preserved in the project's website are L'Aquila and the Columbus Balbo Review, published in the 30s. Of L'Aquila, we have only one issue. And then the Italian American Citizen, published in the 30s, again, one issue, 1933. La Voce dello Schiavo, published in Tampa, Florida. That esce quando può, was an anarchist paper. And the digital newspaper collection will be shared with Seton Hall University, the Phaedra at University of Padua Libraries, in partnership with an array of archives and institutions in North America and worldwide. The Immigration History Research Center at the University of Minnesota, the library at the University of New Orleans, Samford University Libraries, the Alabama Division of Archives and History, Nashville Metro Archives, and the Library of Congress. This is one last aspect of the project, is the public history component. The project will develop a historical marker program. One of them, it's in the bag already in Nashville, Tennessee, will be unveiled in May of 2025, a marker to memorialize Primo Bartolini, Italian teacher, patriot, and poet, who operated in Nashville between 1908 and 1959 when he died. The other one should be a marker placed in the old parish prison site in New Orleans, Louisiana, where the lynching of 1891 took place. And the last one should substitute the marker planted by the municipality of West Blockton, Alabama, where an Italian Catholic cemetery is present. As you see, it has been used as a target for exercising some shooting skills by questionable individuals, but it will be probably substituted. This is the website and the online repository. It's already live. It's been enriched. We have Il Gladiatore, the Columbus Balbo, and the beginning of the runs of La Voce Coloniale, which is quite extensive. As you see, it's interesting to note the presence of Columbus already in both in the titles and in the contents of this is actually a special edition for the 1934 anniversary of the discovery. So the newspaper collection is there. We'll see a few specimens of those newspapers in a minute. The importance of newspapers for the study of Italian diasporas is evident in itself. But most importantly, what we are looking at is the re-territorialization that migrant communities had to and have to go through essentially in order to adapt to the new target country. A cultural re-territorialization mostly, but also ethnic and political re-territorialization. Most of these newspapers express one of and exemplify one of these kinds of re-territorialization, a reproduction of a paper homeland, whether a political, racial, ethnic, in different way, or all of these actually could be, they could be, and they usually are, important tools for the mediation of racial differences and the assertion of racial and ethnic identities. Let's move into the area of study, New Orleans. Several Southern Italian immigrants were present in Louisiana already before the Civil War. Many moved to the Bayou State by 1850. There's as you see here, it's a minimal statistics, but by 1890, 1 year before the lynching, between 15,000 and 20,000 Southern Italians lived in New Orleans. There's a demographic boom. Here, I would call it the sister project of the show, titled Sail. Alice Gussoni is here, and she's working on the project Sail. Sicilians Dreaming Louisiana. Sicilian Dreaming Louisiana, that's the title of the project. It's a matter of bridging a gap here. We talked about earlier on, I think in one of the sessions about Scotland, how gaps are present in our investigations. One single project is often not enough to bridge these gaps. I think Alice will bring this gap because we need to understand properly how and what happened between 1850 and 1890. So what kind of people arrived in Louisiana, who were they, how they arrived, who were the facilitators of those travels and voyages, and what was behind that. And I'm talking about this because I talked at the beginning about, and in the title, about racial mediation and whatnot. The problem that I found in my analysis of the very first analysis of these newspapers is that, well, the racial aspect of it all is not that evident in terms of how La Voce Coloniale, for instance, responded to possible racial biases that came from outside, from the native press, for instance. There was something else. There was something else, and was linked to this, okay, to the malavita, to the idea of malavita, which is a concept that arrives from Italy, from this work by Antonino Cutrera. Pardon the terrible quality of this picture, but it's just to have an idea of what this forgotten book is. That gives an idea of what the Italian South, where most immigrants to Louisiana and to New Orleans arrived, especially Sicily, was in and after 1861, where a largely feudalistic system was in place, where Cutrera says repeated invasions of Sicily and long periods of domination created widespread resentment, diffidence, and intolerance. This created the public image of the state as an enemy in the South, the government as an enemy, and brought to the rejection of authority of the judicial system and of the law that resulted, of course, in criminal activities being kind of the norm. Southern villages with no sense of community, lacking civic responsibility. The latifund, mostly latifund, run by absentee landlords, the presence of the gabellotti, the padroni, the overseers, with farmers and tenants trying to seek protection by and from someone else, with the capi mafiosi entering the frame, and the transfer of power between feudal landowners and mafiosi that led to a parallel government being put in place, parallel government made of cosche and associazioni. The Malavita soon became, tied very tightly with immigration. Okay, being a mafia affiliate meant easy access to a profession and protection from punishment. Petty criminals and criminals of profession, professional criminals, including the vendettas and the crimes of passion, often these people often emigrated to avoid punishment. The majority of Italians emigrating from southern Italy were instead peasants, we know that, seeking economic opportunities, so they were not all criminals, but obviously the criminals were mostly and most evident most blatantly evident in the chronicles, especially reported by and accounted for by Native American newspapers. And it's a fact that many of these people chose New Orleans because of its fast-growing economy. Among them, there was this guy, Giuseppe Esposito, a kidnapper. This is a portrait in Illustrazione Italiana of 1881. He was arrested by the Carabinieri. He managed to escape. He emigrated to New Orleans in 1879. Set up a criminal system similar to the one he had established in Sicily, and in July 12, 1881, was arrested by Mike and Dave Hennessy. Surely a name most people know and remember. Who killed the chief? David Hennessy was the chief of police of New Orleans, killed, and the killing of Dave Hennessy triggered the lynchings of 1891. And this, who killed the chief, was the question that taunted Italian Americans, Italian kids, for many, many years to come. Okay, by Native Americans, by Native whites. Who killed the chief was the question asked by many and for many years. Okay, these are just a few, of course, of the press releases and articles in local newspapers, 1890, after the assassination, and then this after the mob lynched the 11 Italians in 1891. The lynching brought social cultural consequences are evident, and in front of everyone. The PUC, okay, March 25th, 1891. There isn't any racial representation of Italians there, but there is the mafia word, because the acquittal of the Italians was due, according to the local press and the national American press, due to the fact that the Italians had corrupted, had bribed the jury. So the acquittal was not accepted by the population of New Orleans, and a few elected citizens of the city lynched the Italians. Journalists of the time started using the word mafia loosely. to sell newspapers, often linking the crimes of individual people to organized crime. And it was a retroactive type of denomination and label that became to be spread out, to be applied to crimes committed by Italians usually. Okay, this is some probably well-known examples of what I'm saying, of the representation of Italians. It's not common to find any kind of racial representation. There's always this mafia undertone, present in the local press. And there are many evident examples of anti-Italian bias related to the criminal setup and the criminal activities, expositors and other peoples, that became part of the public domain. This is a very famous sentence, very famous quote by Theodore Roosevelt in a letter to his sister, saying that I was basically sharing, the sentiment of the population of New Orleans about the Dagoes who had just been killed. He still called them Dagoes, and he says, personally, I think it's rather a good thing about the lynching and the results of that mob's activities. The Italian races in the Dillingham report, not even the Dillingham report, the Dillingham Commission report, focuses that much on the Italian race as such, as being assimilated to the African Americans. There aren't many traces of that in the Dillingham report either. There's confusion about how Italy is geographically set out, but that's a different thing. Liguria is regarded as being part of the South, but still the Italians are considered in 1911 still a desirable kind of race in general. So there's no much assimilation to any other race than the white. And let's get to the press in conclusion of this short presentation. This is Little Americano. We're talking about a poetic of fragments here. Little Americano is a very old newspaper. This is one of the latest issues that we have, 1912, see, with Labor Omnia Vincit, so a socialist kind of approach to things. But we can see here that this is an 1894 issue of Little Americano. Look at how many Italian businesses are there in New Orleans. These are all in New Orleans, basically. All 95% of them, at least. So Italians were prominent in terms of the position, the economic position they occupied in New Orleans. Associate that with the supposedly criminal activities that some other people conducted, and this can explain, at least this is one of the gaps that we have in the narration. Okay, criminality, businesses, envy of the establishment. That led, in fact, to the lynching, mostly, not any racial bias. This is what we have from the documents, at least. Or at least this is one of the gaps that we have to investigate. And then let's get to La Voce Coloniale. La Voce Coloniale published between 1915 and 1955. Now, here we have a different narrative, this is another gap that we have. We don't hear much about Italian racism. We hear about Italians being the victims of racism, of racially connoted sentiment. But here we have some scientific or pseudo-scientific reports or article. This is a long article, it's a page-long article talking about how a black can become white. Okay? We also have cose riguardanti l'associazione politica italiana, followed by a question, che cosa sei? What are you? Is the question that the editorialist asks to the readers. Are you a foreign national or are you an enemy alien? This is all about, gaining citizenship and being on the right side of the law. So again, back to the criminality and the criminal kind of divide that there is between the good and the bad members of society. So again, it's not really racially connoted. It's mostly about being compliant with the law. What it says at the end there, se non saremo tutti d'accordo e non lavoreremo tutti per lo stesso scopo, saremo sempre gli eterni Daigos. Daigos continuamente disprezzati e bistrattati. So there's no denial here that there's of course some disprezzo for the Italians. The problem is what kind of disprezzo it is. And it is evident to me that there's some work to do here about, analyzing more how the local communities perceived Italians as inferior, not only because, and mostly not because of their racial belonging, but because of some biases that followed the Italians to the US from Italy, especially through the works of Lombroso and Niceforo, mostly, and misinterpretations of those works as well, I should say. And now well, this is another thing, how Italians try to overcome and assert their racial belonging, the racial greatness, especially during the fascist years, with a strong campaign through the columns of La Voce Coloniale and the Columbus Balbo Review. Loria was one of the founders of La Voce Coloniale, Elviro Di Laura, one of the founders of the Columbus, and the editors, the managing editor of the Columbus Balbo Review. The Italians reacted to, and this is one of the, I think, the most important findings so far of the project, reacted to any bias and discrimination trying to assert, especially during the advent of, during the years of fascism, through a massive campaign for the development of Italian schools, for the study of Italian language, and for the introduction of the study of Italian language in schools and universities in order to belong to the white race. So it's a project that tried to bring the Italian race in the spotlight of the white races, of the mainstream at least races, not discriminated against ones, through the recognition of the greatness of its language. This is something that happened in Tennessee as well, apart from Alabama and Louisiana. And again, on racism, on Italian racism, this is probably one of the best examples of how Italians tried to assert their racial superiority to African Americans. A case of, again, it's all linked to crime, so there must be something there as well. La Voce Coloniale si congratula con la signorina Baragona. Miss Baragona killed an African American trying to steal from her apartment and possibly to use some violence on her, but this was a common link between when it came to criminal activities to put together to depict at least a criminal as a thief and a sexual assault, someone who tried to sexually assault a woman in order to depict him as a monster, a beast in the public opinion. Miss Baragona killed this guy. There's a picture in the pages, in the front page of La Voce Coloniale, and whose editor says, La Voce Coloniale congratulates Miss Baragona for her coolness and presence of mind in punishing the Negro who tried to attack her. This case reminds us of the white race, okay, to keep the Negroes at arm's length, since in recent times what is considered by us as humanity has been interpreted by them as equality. This is a kind of astonishing statement, and I think this is another of the gaps that we ought to investigate, because this kind of narrative so far has been concealed to us simply because these documents were not available. So I think this is something that we should keep pursuing and keep studying for you know, with Alice as well, maybe for the sake of offering a more complete, picture, or complete as possible, as complete as we possibly can, of the migrating experience of Italians in the South. Thank you.
Thank you both, all very interesting. Any question? And I would bring the microphone to you. Yes, please. I am not good.
Okay, my question is about press. You stressed in the very first phase of your presentation there is a larger South, the idea that the press can talk to a larger population rather than Alabama, Georgia, wherever you like. I'm just wondering, at the current stage of your research, if you believe actually this press has been a practical medium for making people connecting each other, so to create a larger community. I'm just reminding a dissertation by an American PhD student that was investigating in particular the area of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, and how fascists tried to connect people living there. So my question is, can we talk about an interstate dialogue, movement of people, a dialogue on common themes that can be interesting for all the communities? So that's something that I think is quite innovative in scholarship about Italian Americans.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, this is precisely why there has been a redefinition of the geographical area of investigation, because in the first phases of the project, I realized, especially when it came, and this is another thing, quite innovative part of it all, especially when it came to the teaching of Italian language as a means of yeah, exactly. There was this kind of osmosis of people and ideas. You know, I started it all years ago, studying by chance this very small community of Italians in Tennessee, and it emerged that, you know, one of these Italians, Primo Bartolini, started teaching language as a teacher of Italian there, and it looked like a very isolated case. Then I found, you know, I started reading Il Gladiatore, and Primo Bartolini was in the columns of Il Gladiatore as, you know, our greatest teacher of Italian up in Tennessee. Birmingham, Alabama is a few hours by train there. So, you know, the train and the newspapers connected the two communities. For us, Birmingham was a larger community, Nashville was a smaller community, of course, but there was certainly a connection there. Bartolini is also in the columns of La Voce Coloniale, when Loria starts talking about introducing the teaching of Italian, which he then manages to obtain at Tulane University. The same happens with Elviro Di Laura. Elviro Di Laura was first immigrated in Nashville, Tennessee, and then he moved down to Birmingham. He moved down to Birmingham where he founded both Il Gladiatore and the Columbus Balbo Review in the 30s, when he became, as many, of course, a follower of the fascist party. As a matter of fact, when the post office in Nashville, Tennessee was built in when the cornerstone was found, it was put there, the city decided to put in that cornerstone a copy of each newspapers and periodicals published in the area. Okay, the Columbus Balbo Review, published in Birmingham, Alabama, not in the state of Tennessee, is one of the papers in there. So there's a mobility of people, of ideas, of newspapers as well. So there was there was osmosis, really. There was cultural osmosis between these communities. So yes.
Yeah, whatever. If you have a. Depends on your course.
Yeah, my question is for Matteo Brera. If I understand correctly, what you say is that the Italian immigrants were perceived as different and they were also discriminated against, but that was not for racial reasons or not entirely. And also, if I understand correctly, what you said is that there was a misinterpretation and a misreading of Lombroso's and Nicephorus' theories. I would like you to explain a little bit more what you mean by that, because what I know of those theories is that they were, in fact, saying that there was a difference between northern Italians, southern Italians, and that was based on, that was a racial divide. There was a racial divide. And then the us of the white race that we saw before made me think that if you need to assert so strongly that you belong to the white race, maybe, of course, you have some doubt that you are perceived as a white person. And I also would like to say that I think I would quote unquote crimes of passion. I think that is, you were listing crimes of passion as crimes, so maybe, okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, the assertion of being part of the white race, I mean, we also have to consider that we are in 1930 something there, so there was clearly a fascist, I mean, the influence of fascist theories on race that, it was fairly evident there as well. I mean, there was an overarching attempt there to assert, themselves as part from the Italians to be part of the mainstream of the white race, independently. Of course, it happened as a reaction to being discriminated against. There's no doubt that there were some kind of discriminations based on misinterpreted ideas by Lombroso. It's true that Lombroso said there were differences between northern and southern Italians. In the background, however, there was the idea that, Lombroso analyzed northern and southern Italians criminals. So obviously that remained and was interpreted as such, very strictly, almost philologically in North America. So obviously. Yeah, but there's no in the documents. I mean, we're talking about documents and the analysis of documents. 1922, Amite, Independence, Louisiana. 6 Italians are accused and then hanged in the end for the killing of one single person. There's a big outrage in the press. There's no trace in the local American press, the Times Democrat, the Times Picayune, of accusations or biases against the Italians purely based on race. But everything is based on the fact that these people were criminals, in principle. So it's not, we're trying to, as I said, to fill some gaps here, because there was certainly, I mean, one thing doesn't exclude the other. This is fairly evident in itself. The problem is, until now, at least mostly, what we heard is, well, the Italians were discriminated against because they were regarded, especially the Sicilians, they were regarded as blacks, or there was some kind of nuance. In Alabama, there were cities, there was a Dago town that was placed physically in between the white city and the black city. So clearly there was some kind of racial discrimination, also evident in itself. It wasn't the only one. So I talked about a possible gap to be bridged, because the criminal aspect of it all has often been forgotten. So clearly there were lynchings. There's an article in the Gladiator in 1933, I think, that says, it's a short article that says no lynchings occurred in 1932. So it means that there were lynchings up until 1933. Or 31, or some kind of discriminations or heavy discrimination based on race. So one thing doesn't exclude the other.
I think that it depends also when you talk about documents. It also depends on what kind of archive we're exploring, what we're dealing in documents. For example, I'm thinking of this. Of this piece that Ms. Salvo wrote, that is entitled Color, White Complexion, Dark, which she analyzes the document, and she documented her grandmother when she went to the United States, and the fact that this is what was written on her document, that she was white, racial, the color was white, but the complexion was dark. She was a peasant, which wasn't a criminal. So I think this kind of documents tell us also that there is a racial history that is not necessarily something that is stated, but it's something that is constantly there.
Of course, but what I said is not that we should exclude that. That's, I personally take that for granted. I mean, that's already in the document. That's already, it's taken for granted. I mean, I'm not denying that there was some kind of racial discrimination, but we need to, think to review, not necessarily revise, but review and try to complement the picture that we have so far. And then, of course, there's a case-by-case scenario that has to be taken into consideration. So it's not that we are denying it, or I'm not denying that there were racial discriminations purely based on race. But there is another page of the book that has been, in my opinion, not written completely, and it's about the criminal aspect. That's all.
Can I just add to that from the field of psychology? But when psychology emerged as a discipline in the 1870s, they wanted to quantify everything. There were two things they quantified. One was perception, and the other is racial discrimination. Stephen Jay Gould wrote a book, must be 40 years ago by now, The Mismeasure of Man. So Lombroso was not an isolated incident. You had Walton, who was measuring people and doing studies, trying to show how the children of Scottish coal miners were less bright, less adept than children who were raised in middle to upper class London. So there was a widespread attempt to show that immigrants of any kind were inferior to wherever they were going. So I think this is really, what you say, there are not always gaps, right? Because these are complementary. These are all research studies that were published. I mean, there's one fantastic study where they took skulls from all different races and they filled them with mustard seeds and then weighed the mustard seeds to show how blacks were inferior because the mustard seeds weighed less.
Pseudoscience, yeah. I mean, it's,
pseudoscience, which they saw in real science, to absolutely prove that racially others were inferior.
yeah, I mean, and also the observation of behavior of people. Italians were regarded as superior within the inferiority kind of thing. They were mentioned, and they were regarded as workers as superior to the Irish because they didn't get drunk as much as often as the Irish used to. So I mean,
Exactly.
this is all a matter of discrimination and different types of discrimination. They all together create the picture. So this is the point, of course. Yeah.
Ways of life.
Ways of life.
Customs as well. So discrimination really includes many, many facets and many items, many details.
So I just wanted to add, really by chance, I happen to have a document on my computer which I found doing completely utter research that relates to the case of Independence, Louisiana. And it's from a editor of a small nationalist Italian newspaper called Wyoming, Montreal. And he was writing in 1924 to the governor of the state of Louisiana, asking that the sentence against the six condemned be postponed while they attempt to prove their innocence. And on this letter, not only signs it himself, his name is Anthony Pretelli, he's not a very well-known person, but he also has it signed by the president of the World War Veterans Association in San Francisco, California, and the president of the World War Veterans Association in Chicago. Unfortunately, he doesn't say how he got the information, but when you say that there wasn't a big coverage of this in the normal press, obviously it made it somehow to California, it made it to Chicago, it made it to San Francisco. So I think that it's just something that shows how important his work on these newspapers is, because this sort of relatively little known event. And interestingly enough, he does in the letter, we just read one quick little sentence. It says, our six countrymen are the victims of the circumstances and the race hatred of the people of Louisiana, hostile to our nationality. Their condemnation is only based on circumstantial evidence, without even giving the defendants proof of their culpability of the crime of return on the 8th of May.
Yeah, but again, this is interesting, and if you don't mind, I'd like to have a copy of that, because it's amazing. No, but it's to go back to what you said. Yes, absolutely. The Voce Coloniale. Now I don't have the exact figures at hand, but he had a very, very good distribution for the type of. He went out of state, clearly. I mean, and this coverage they offered probably got to migrant communities outside of the state, and even up to California and to Canada. It wasn't an uncommon thing for a paper of the importance that La Voce Coloniale had. There was the Progresso Italoamericano in the Northeast. The Voce Coloniale was the newspaper in the South, so it had a massive circulation, and of course we cannot. We may find proof of circulation that far, or as far as we think, but it is plausible that this information, this type of information, ended up across the borders. There was a cultural osmosis also with Canada. Canadian newspapers, I worked on Canadian newspapers in the past, ended up in the American South too. People moved as well. Sometimes they brought with themselves, the newspaper. So it wasn't a live coverage of the events as we have today, but clearly, the information, and we're talking about 1924. As a matter of fact, the Independence Louisiana case lasted for a while because there were appeals, counter appeals. So the crime, I think, occurred in 1922, and then everything was settled in 1924. Or 23, something like that. Now, if memory serves me right. So yeah, there was again a gap, a temporal gap here, but it's consistent with what we're talking about. And yeah, the being against the Italian nationality, again, yeah, it's a racial thing. If we want to think as a racial thing, but if you go back to the hostility of the people of Louisiana, of New Orleans against the Italians, well, as the pages of the Italo-Americano showed, I mean, the Italians were really prominent as fruit peddlers, as importers. Alice will tell us about how important they were in terms of bringing people over and back, the transportation. The transnational movement of people was in the hands of Italians. There's a Maqueca building on Canal Street in New Orleans. Maqueca was the bananas king, one of the 11 lynched by the mob. Maqueca was never considered, was a prominent of New Orleans, was never regarded as black or close to the black race, but it was, allegedly tied according to his financial competitors with the mafia. It was so prominent that in 10 years he had a building to his name as the bananas king. A fruit importer became so important that it had an empire, established an empire. How did he establish that empire? That's part of the picture that we have to consider. So it was not only an anti-national, an anti-Italian bias per se, or purely on racial ground, or on the racial ground that we perceive as such, so a difference in complexion and that sort of things. But there was a financial and political influence that some Italians had, and became dangerous for parts of the establishment. And let's not forget that New Orleans, when you talk about crime, was a rather relevant city for, in the criminal landscape of the United States. Well, at some point, it was one of the worst cities in terms of crime and crime rate in the United States. The very same Dave Hennessy, chief of police, became chief of police after his father died, killed by a political opponent. Dave and his brother were also accused of killing Devreux, an officer of the law, a few years back. So crime was everywhere and had its importance. So again, it's not a universal kind of thought or solution or label, but it's certainly part of the picture.
I have a question for the other Matteo. I assume you have analyzed other regional groups throughout the United States, not only Wyoming, but also in other US states. Have you found some macro aspects that united them all? Because, I'm thinking about, the MAI, the Museum of Italian Immigration at Comenda dei Pre. And, there the stories and the history of Italian migration is told through specific individuals that also belong to, regional groups moving, okay? We have the Sicilians, we have the Ligurians, we have Piedmontese, etc., etc. In your research, have you found macro aspects that are united these groups in, in creating a community and maintaining roots, legacy, and similar aspects?
Well, just leaving behind Wyoming and my specific case, if you look at the experience of Italians in the United States, you may realize how they have quite different experiences. It's not the same thing to talk about Italians in New York or New Orleans or Wyoming or wherever. It seems like the few things that get together, these people were probably some symbols such as Christopher Columbus that became an ethnic hero, but today it's pretty much contested, because even some Italian Americans do not like him as an ethnic hero. But if you look back probably till the 1970s, he was actually the Italian per excellence, even if today is contested. Other symbols, probably Mussolini was another one, because it was his imaginary was scattered all over the United States in the Italian communities, much more than other people like Dante Alighieri or even other other Italian symbols. Probably after the 1970s ethnic revival, the idea of food and the conceptualization of family became common values to be shared to Hollywood or to the public discourse of Italian Americans. But I will doubt there are many issues that get together Italians because they are so different, and even connecting to Italy. Can we talk about a poor transnational connections between Italy and Italian Americans? Maybe sometimes, but it really depends on where we are looking at. People from Wyoming could look at Italy less intensively than Italians living in New York. I think the real point is that there is not a single Italian American community.
right.
There are many with different stories, different periodizations. So, and I do think there is not much point to say there is a community or something sharing. I mean, everyone lives their own life, and that's the good thing, I think.
Okay.